Good morning, Dan. And in for Amy this morning is Sean from Elmwood Park. And Sean, it seems to me President Trump and frankly a lot of House Republicans up for re-election, facing difficult re-election battles, who voted for this omnibus spending bill, in addition to President Trump, of course, signing it, may have greatly underestimated the negative reaction it is generating from the base and how it seems more likely to imperil their political capital and their re-elections than buoy their interests.
I hope so.
And look at this. I mean, Washington Examiner, Trump's problem with his base just grew 10 times bigger, and pointing out this letter written by the board members of Advocates for Victims of Illegal Alien Crime. These are some of the people who campaigned with Trump, people whose families have lost a family member, had a family member severely injured by predators who are in this country illegally and in many cases multiple times deported, but we still can't keep predators out of our country. And it's a real problem that is universally admitted, but it has not been properly dealt with. This letter starts, open letter to President Trump starts with, how could you? How could you? Your excuse that you had to sign the omnibus bill for national security reasons is as empty as the claim of sanctuary cities that they need to protect criminals to reduce crime. They openly complain about money for the wall not being there. Maybe you can build a beautiful picket fence. Money for sanctuary cities continuing to be there. It really takes the president to task. And if you're going to lose your energy on that issue with that constituency, then he may be looking up at 42 to 45% approval rating, seeming to inch up. But that is going to be a road to nowhere with the enthusiasm deficit Republican office holders are facing come November. And I think this just dug the hole that much deeper. But for more of a view on that, we're pleased to be joined by Matthew Continetti, who's the editor of the Washington Free Beacon, contributing editor to the Weekly Standard. Matt, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
What about the calculation by President Trump, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Republicans, about passing and the president signing this omnibus spending bill? Did they underestimate what the reaction was likely to be?
I think so, and I think the president probably got rolled on this one. I think he trusted Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell to work out the details, and he was also heavily influenced by Secretary Mattis, who really stressed the priority of funding the military and getting it back up to its kind of pre-Obama strength. And, of course, that is a top priority of President Trump, and he campaigned on that. At the same time, though, it does seem that he did not get nearly what he wanted on, say, the wall and on some immigration enforcement measures. And that's just basically, I think, because he wasn't paying attention. You see him now visibly kind of influenced by the reaction against this bill, and now moving to saying, well, actually, I'm exploring whether the Defense Department can appropriate funds for the wall, because that, too, is a national security issue.
The pre-Obama spending of military is kind of a ruse, isn't it, Matt? I mean, they get the baseline budgeting in even the sequester. So the fact of the matter is they're already spending significantly more than the emergency levels they want you to believe is happening, right? And as a conservative, I believe that any Republican that touched this should have the repercussions of losing his office. That until we do that kind of house cleaning, we're really on this same hamster cycle where every, 3 months before an election, they're conservatives, and then they get in and they spend more money, create more debt, the usual, right?
I think one big difference here is that the House Republicans and congressional Republicans don't really understand why Donald Trump won. And they still haven't really come to terms with the fact that the party is not the same party that they think it is. And Donald Trump won by really distinguishing himself on a few issues, primarily immigration, trade, retirement security, and kind of a more skeptical posture toward preventive war, right? He ran against the Iraq War and won the Republican nomination and then the election on that. Well, if you look at the Republicans in Congress, I mean, they're on the other side of all those issues from President Trump. And so it makes sense to me that they would come up with this kind of dog's breakfast of an omnibus bill in order to get out of Dodge and go on vacation and begin planning their reelection campaigns. As you point out, though, it's unlikely to help them. And right now, even though the generic ballot is closing the gap between Republicans and Democrats, and even though President Trump's approval rating has been rising in recent weeks, I think this doesn't give Republican base voters much reason to be enthusiastic about the election in November.
With respect to the Russian collusion investigation and that matter that hangs over the president's head and likely will into the midterms, is it starting to really turn his direction? I point to yesterday's announcement that Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General for the Department of Justice, is launching an investigation into alleged FISA abuses by the FBI, in addition to the failure of Mueller to produce much of anything on point with respect to the initial rationales for this investigation, bringing in still the prospect of Hillary Clinton and what may or may not have been going on in the Obama administration. That seems to be getting a little bit more pronounced. Is that aspect of what he's got to deal with in terms of impediments to policymaking, is that starting to turn for him, or is it just kind of still a muddled mess, too soon to tell?
Well, I think he's been trying to bring on more aggressive lawyers. And remember, last week we thought he had scored Joe DeGeneva and Victoria Tunsing, who are some of the toughest conservative lawyers in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, they had a conflict because they were representing somebody else who's been entangled in the Mueller probe, and so they didn't join his team. I think President Trump does want to take a more aggressive stance toward Mueller. I don't think he's necessarily going to fire him anytime soon, but I do think he wants to be prepared to kind of challenge the premises of this investigation. And I also stress there are some conflicts of interest with Mueller himself, and he has facts on his side on that. I'm not actually sure Trump really pays all that much attention to the Russia story, in the sense that he clearly thinks it's all a hoax. He likes pointing out these conflicts and misleading statements, like I say on Twitter. But when you look at it over the past couple of days, he's really been focusing on changing the nature of his cabinet and making his cabinet much more in line with what he wants. And so that's what you saw with the move with the Veterans Affairs Administration just yesterday, and then, of course, earlier the changes at State and the National Security Council.
But the question is, should he be more focused in on that? Because is there any doubt in your mind that if Democrats do take control of the House, and possibly Senate as well, but let's just assume the House for the sake of this discussion, in November, that they will not pursue impeachment against the president, even if there's nothing more then than we have now, just the cloud hanging over him?
Yeah, and I think that's one reason why Trump is concerned about keeping the House in November. He's been raising quite a bit of money, actually, for Republicans and for his own campaign in 2020. He's been stressing that Democrats will raise taxes and will be bad on the border if they get into power. He's telling everybody on Capitol Hill that he's willing to go and campaign for their re-elections. Now, the problem is, like I say, is Republicans think that Trump is a liability, when in fact I believe he's an asset. That it is really the Republican Party is in danger this year because they don't understand why Donald Trump is president. They still believe in kind of multilateral trade deals with no real enforcement. They still believe in kind of this idea of comprehensive immigration reform with some amnesty for the illegal immigrants who are here. And until they come to terms with the fact that their voters are against them on those two policies as well as others, they're in a bad position.
I kind of think the omnibus that they presented, the Republicans created and presented, shows you there really is virtually no difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. But I had a question about the Mueller investigation. I was optimistic when this started because I had always felt the real scandal in the Russia investigation would be that they would stumble upon the evidence that showed the Clinton Foundation, the Uranium One, the front group in Canada owned by a Russian. I also am a fan of this Peter Schweitzer, and in his new book, he talks about the Rosemont that is really primarily Joe Biden's son, Hunter, and Kerry's stepson, and their connection to a Russian oligarch in the Ukraine. But the reality is he's not interested in actual collusion between America and Russia. He's just interested in Trump people and Russia. Is that what I'm seeing here?
I think it's pretty clear. Yeah, he's the Mueller investigation is a missile directed at Trump. I mean, there's no question about that. And in fact, I think actually Mueller seems to be almost led by the media more than Mueller is leading the story here. You know, there time and time again you'll see like big stories pop up, like when Fire and Fury was published earlier this year, and then all of a sudden you see reports that Mueller's calling in the people who were quoted in the Michael Wolff book. Well, that's a little bit odd. If you were, if you're an investigator, shouldn't you already be aware of these things? And you look at like the New York Times story that was released yesterday about this reported discussion between one of Trump's lawyers, who's no longer there, and lawyers for Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort last year about possible pardons. Well, I'm sure we'll see a follow-up story sometime saying, "Oh, Mueller's going to look into that too." So I think Mueller, the problem with Mueller investigation has always been he's had an extremely broad mandate. These special counsels always become kind of self-sustaining. They go on for years. They always move away from their initial reason for existing. I saw calls over the last weekend for Mueller to investigate the Stormy Daniels controversy.
Oh,
well,
right.
I mean,
Right.
that has nothing to do with Russia, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a big problem, and you would think that Trump would have more support on Capitol Hill, say, for reining in Mueller, and that hasn't materialized either.
He is Matthew Continetti, editor of the Washington Free Beacon, contributing editor to the Weekly Standard. Matthew, thanks always for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
And he joined us on the turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a